now we're going to see one way of communicating science with data visualization, with data information, and we're going to connect with Angela Morelli. Angela Morelli is an award-winning Italian information designer, but she's based in Norway, in Oslo. She's the CEO and co-founder of the InfoDesignLab. She's been collaborating with many organizations, many institutions, and also with the IPCC, the European Environment Agency, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and many more, in trying to find ways to make sure that data are visualized and communicated in a way that it's not only nice to look at, but particularly it's actually helping people to become part of the process, so to understand and to enter in the process. So I will leave the floor to Angela. She's connected with us. Good afternoon, Angela.
Good afternoon.
The floor is... Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot. Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Elisabetta, and hello, everybody. It is an honor to be with you today. My name is Angela Morelli, and I am an information designer, and I run InfoDesignLab, a socially conscious information design firm. So basically, we help companies and organizations turn complex data into meaningful narratives, unique visualizations, and compelling messages. We work with scientists and activists, with the public and private sector, with universities and the media. We teach a lot and run courses, and most of the time, the goal of our projects is to co-design visualizations that make complex knowledge more accessible to wider audiences, empowering specialists and non-specialists to make informed decisions about the big challenges we face as a society, from education to health, from social justice to climate change. And when about 15 years ago, I started diving into climate science, and I understood the urgency of environmental issues and the importance of critical thinking, I decided that I would knock on the door of research organizations advocating for a new way of visualizing data in a design-driven way, in a human-centered way. And most of the time, nobody would answer my call. But very few times they would, and those who have answered have been pioneers in contributing to a changing culture that goes from a way of working that is order and delivery to a way of working that is design-driven. What do I mean by design-driven? If there is one rule or metric that is increasingly important for us, is participation, especially when we design information for decision-making or for high-level negotiations. There are so many different actors involved in the design process, so many scientists or experts from different disciplines, and so many users with different needs, that orchestrating that participation is one of the most important things of all. And that is why a lot of our work does not happen behind a computer screen, not anymore. It consists of mastering the data, interviewing stakeholders to understand their needs, collaborating with other designers, developers, and cognitive scientists. The word co-design is probably the best word to describe the way we work. We co-design with our audience, and most importantly, we co-design with the scientists and the content experts. We borrow tools from systemic design, service design, cognitive science, and we bring them into the information design and data visualization space. The goal is to empower audiences to see patterns and to move from data to knowledge and action. And if we have to use a diagram to visualize the journey from data to action, we could say that on one side we have the audience, and reaching the mind of our audience is for us the most important thing of all. Learning how the audience will use and receive the information and understanding the context in which the information will be processed is key for the design process. And on the other side, we have the authors of the data, we have the scientists, and listening to their needs and ideas is equally important. As designers, we need to dive into the content with guidance of the content experts, and we need to build a deep and shared understanding of the nature of the data and the science that underpins it. So these two actors are the most important players if our goal is to turn data into information, presenting it in a way that becomes knowledge in the mind of the users and hopefully help make important decisions and ultimately inspire change. Now, the process from data to change that on the diagram looks so neat, in reality looks more like this. It is not linear, it is not tidy and neat at all for different reasons. First, because of the collaborative and iterative nature of the design process that involves different users and scientists and designers and stakeholders, and because it is not a plug-and-play process. We have to adapt to the challenges and projects we deal with. Second, because cognition is complex. Information is mediated by the human brain. It's not the message that goes into the brain, but the interpretation of that message and how it is encoded. Third, because science tells us that as human beings, we assess how the information we receive is going to affect our lives, our context, our values, and the links to the social groups we belong to. And when information threatens those values, we struggle accepting the information even if there is scientific evidence behind it. And fourth, because even if the information is communicated properly, even if we understand it, even if we make the right decisions, we might not be able to act because there are barriers out there that prevent us from doing so. And as designers, we need to be aware of those barriers. And these are some of the projects that we've worked on: the visualization of the Norwegian environmental targets and design of a platform to navigate through those targets, the design of a timeline that explains the history of the 1.5 target, showing that the rise of fame of the target is built on years of careful groundwork by people who share a profound precariousness to the adverse effects of climate change. The visualization of the global water footprint of humanity, and the design of resources to visualize how much water is embedded in what we eat, the interactive evidence to decision framework, which is a system designed to help groups of people use evidence in a structured and transparent way to inform decisions in the context of health recommendations. And at times, we have been working on projects that put us on a very steep learning curve. An example is working with people who cannot afford to fail, activists around the world who live in danger for their lives, suppressed by regimes, or fight climate justice. When working on extreme projects like these ones, the learning points become very evident, and a lot of the noise in the work we do is taken out from the equation, and you are left with the essence of what really matters. And another extreme collaboration with a steep learning curve is the collaboration with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, the United Nations body that assesses the science related to climate change. Now, in the last 4 years, we have been responsible for the visualizations of the summaries for policymakers of 3 reports: the report on global warming of 1.5 that was approved in 2019, the report on climate change and land that was approved in 2019, and the report on the physical science basis, which is the Working Group 1 contribution to the AR6 cycle approved in August 2021. Now, these reports have been identified as the most important climate reports of the 21st century, because the decisions we take now are crucial. And being the information designers responsible for the visualizations of the summaries for policymakers of these reports has been a defining journey for us professionally. The expectation for these reports are usually incredibly high. For the 1.5 report, for instance, there were 2 million hits on the IPCC website, over 4,000 pieces broadcasted in radio and television, over 10,000 articles published just in the first 48 hours following the launch. And if you open the cover of these executive summaries, you will see the names of the drafting authors of each report, the scientists, who are the real heroes. But you will also see our names among them: Tom Johansen and Angela Morelli, which is still unbelievable for us. So my question is, what on earth are 2 information designers doing in the list of drafting authors of the most important climate report of the 21st century? I don't think we have all the answers. We are constantly looking for those ourselves. But what we do know is that information design can shape content. Information design is content. And it has the power to turn information into knowledge, action, and change. And when Anna Pirani, the head of the IPCC Technical Support Unit's Working Group 1, approached us in 2016, it was clear that they wanted to pay more and more attention to the way they were using visualizations in their summaries for policymakers. They wanted to turn the visualizations into milestones to be reviewed and approved in the same way text would be. The challenge for us was very high, considering that the way the IPCC process works is incredibly complex and rigorous. And here's when some extremes enter the picture. Because one IPCC iteration for the drafting process of the report looks like this. Lead author meetings and work is done remotely until authors submit drafts of the report, and the drafts are sent out for review in a very open process. Anybody can comment on the review drafts. Then comments are sent out to the coordinating lead authors and the team. Now, this is one iteration of the IPCC process. And for the 1.5 report, for example, there were 4 of those iterations. And at the very end, you have an approval session where delegations from more than 150 countries, scientists, IPCC chairs, gather together for the final approval. And the review order drafts can be seen as a massive user testing sessions where both the text and the visualizations are reviewed by hundreds of experts worldwide. It is a process that is highly participatory. Now, what do you think that happens when you send out the drafts with the visualizations? You get feedback, right? If you have ever conducted user testing or included users for feedback in your projects, you know what user testing feels like. A mix of empowerment and vulnerability. Now, in the 1.5 report across 3 drafts, 42,001 comments from experts and from countries with different needs and perspectives were collected, and comments have to be addressed one by one, all 42,001. They eat your work like a piece of cake. And they can tear it apart for very good reasons. So this process is so participatory, rigorous and transparent that we have rarely witnessed anything like that before. But this is just me scratching the surface. Maybe you just start grasping the magnitude of the experience for us. And after the drafting process, there is the final approval session. For the 1.5 report, hundreds of delegates from 196 countries gathered in Incheon, South Korea, and the approval is called word-by-word approval, because actually every word, comma, visualization is up for a final approval session. And since we had been going through fire and ice for months, leading up and arriving to the approval, we thought that we were in for just a really interesting trip, almost a conference, to observe some negotiations on the highest level in a beautiful city. And we could not be more wrong, because the word approval doesn't capture what actually happens at these meetings. It makes it sound relaxed and easygoing, but in reality, the work of the scientist is put under a microscope, including the visualizations we co-designed with them. And of course, there are country politics and national interests at play, but the scientists are there to make sure that any changes to the figures, to the visualizations or text do not undermine, misinterpret, or in any way compromise the science. And the adrenaline level is really high. Now, we entered our very first approval without having any idea of how things would be. But we entered all the approvals with a rock-solid knowledge of the content and the data, of the risks and the caveats, of the uncertainties and challenges. And not having that solid knowledge would have been devastating for the visualization process. The visualizations had to be approved word by word, millimeter by millimeter, and the huge benefit of the continuous collaboration kicked in on so many aspects, enabling us to understand the challenges, suggesting the most appropriate solution, being very firm at times, enabling the scientists to own the visualizations, and allowing also the delegates to see these visualizations as a result of their own work, because of the co-creation process in the review rounds. To manage the co-design process, we have to create specific tools to keep everybody in the loop, to ensure everybody is on top of the development from the beginning to the end. One of the things we do is to record the history of each visualization using slide presentations shared with authors and with everybody involved in the process. And we call these presentations slide books. And here I'm flicking through the pages of the slide books of one visualization. For each visual, between the beginning of the process and the final approval, we co-design many versions. The evolution of the visual can be driven by different types of changes in the narrative structure, because the data evolves, because review comments highlight specific challenges, because the narrative of the report can change. So in the presentations, we include the initial sketches sent by the authors, the outcome of the discussions on the peak of the narrative, the drafts, the study of different narrative structures, the unsolved challenges, the strategies to address hundreds of review comments, the email exchange with the authors, the update of the data sets, and how the intent of the visualization evolves until the last iterations, where we focus on the macro and micro design details. Now, we would never claim that the visualizations you see in these summaries for policymakers are, visually speaking, the best they could be. Because given free rein, we would have designed things differently, but it's not about us. The policymakers are the audience, and it's hard to imagine how any data visualization could be more tailored to an audience's needs in this process. Every single one of the world's policymakers gave their stamp of approval to these visuals. By the end of the approvals, the delegates co-owned the visualizations too. Each one of the visualizations represents a lasting tool, not a one-time impression. The basis to start, we hope, a discussion around action. And one of the most important things that I have learned in the past 20 years is that clear, inclusive, and powerful communications are a consequence of good design, but most of all, of brave leadership. Because it is easy to agree that we need more clarity, that we need to communicate data in a more powerful way, but it's often hard to accept that in order to get there, we have to do things in a different way. And working with IPCC has been one of those journeys where you witness a change in culture when it comes to designing data, from a traditional order and delivery way of working to a design-driven way of working, where the involvement of users and many stakeholders is key. And for many organizations, this is the new normal, and it gives us a world of opportunities when it comes to communicating complex data. And I would like to end by sharing a memory. In 2013, I was queuing with my family near the entrance to the Warner Brothers Harry Potter studios in London. And this quote was standing in large letters on one of the walls. No story lives unless someone wants to listen. So it's not just enough to produce data visualizations if they do not meet our audience where they are, whoever the audience is supposed to be. Broad audience for a media outlet, patients for a doctor, policymakers for the IPCC, and so on. So whatever the format, whether it's static or interactive, printed or digital, we have to make sure that we are meeting the audience where they are. Otherwise, we are basically wasting time and resources. And in order to achieve that, we need to co-design with users and content experts. We need to embrace our audience and their needs from the start to make sure that we build engaging and understandable narratives that they want to listen to. So thank you very much for listening. This is from me for today.
Amazing. It's an amazing process and methodology. I have one question, if I can, for you.
Yes.
Just a quick one from here, which is really starting from this last bit that you were saying, the importance of not only addressing the audiences, but involving them from the beginning. So you're talking about here very complex data. You show us data that are also constantly refined and adjusted and updated and integrated and so on. So if instead of the policymakers or the scientists or entrepreneurs, let's talk about maybe, I don't know, students or younger people, how would the process change? Maybe the process wouldn't change, but I'm sure you have to take other things into consideration as well. Or am I wrong?
Yes. No, you are completely right. When we design for different target audience, I would say that the skeleton is pretty much the same, and the logic is pretty much the same, co-designing and participation. So most of the time we identify the audience, and we don't design with the audience in mind, right? Thinking about persona, so thinking about the average user. We go out, we identify real users, and we interview them. So we start by doing in-depth interviews to identify their needs, to really understand who these people are, where they consume the information. And we carry their knowledge and their presence throughout the entire process. So this happens for IPCC, and it happens for any other project we work with. So if we have to communicate things to patients, if we have to communicate things to school kids, the logic is always the same: embracing and co-designing from the very beginning.
Which I think it's really what makes all of this clearly a very complex and super needed piece of work. So thank you, Angela Morelli, for the work and also for the attention to the needs, the information needs of the different type of audiences or publics, as we journalists call them sometimes, because I think that's what sometimes we not undervalue, but maybe underestimate the need of really properly taking into consideration the different type of people we're talking to, and we are trying to reach and involve in the public discourse, especially when we're trying to find solutions that cater for all of our needs. Thank you, Angela Morelli, for your work. And
Thanks, everybody.